Salam, Muzammal here from Wisdom in Nature. I've just finished a really heart-opening conversation interview with Sabnum Dharamsi that you're about to hear. And what I really appreciated and one of the reasons I reached out to Sabnum is that not only does she have a lived and professional experience around the inner world, around psychology, around Islamic psychology. She teaches in that field, and she has a recognized course and sees individuals privately, but also, as well as the inner world and the spiritual world and the emotional world, excuse me, she also has a real rich background in things like justice, in things like organizational conflict and cohesion and community and power. So she's engaged in outer change making and done so in a way that is persistent and with patience, and doesn't just cover up the difficulties but also has a connection with something that's greater. And she has that lived experience and that professional experience with the inner world. So it was a real pleasure. The conversation was rich and went really smoothly and opened into territories that I think a lot of people who are involved, so if you're involved with change making or the inner world and are interested on the other side or straddle both, then you'll really appreciate the conversation and the themes that we touched on. And the initial theme we had called in our discussions prior was community, culture and justice, and how that maps on the Muslim communities or the Muslim psyche. So that was a kind of starting point. I hope you enjoy watching. Great. So I'm really pleased to have Sabnum Dharamsi here on this Wisdom in Nature conversation. I'm Muzammal Hussain. I'm a representative of Wisdom in Nature and also engaged in therapy and other work. And Sabnum, first of all, welcome to this program.
Thank you so much, Muzammal, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And we had bits of conversation in the lead up to this, and what kind of drew me to reaching out to you was already having seen an interview of yourself and Abdullah, and also looked at some of your writing, and kind of been, really drawn by your understanding and the way, your kind of appreciation of the nuances of life and of politics. And there's a kind of, even though you may not have articulated it directly, I sensed an understanding of diversity and, people's kind of rank in society and things like that. I think there was a lot of richness that just came through. That things aren't always completely clear, and it's okay. And I'd love for us to go a bit more into some of those themes, talking particularly about the Muslim community, the inner world, Islamic psychology, and so forth. But I'd like to just hear, maybe in relation to that, a bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're right. I guess our work, you mentioned Abdullah, who's my husband and partner as well in this. But I would sort of say our work is very much a reflection of who we are, right? So we have pretty consciously moved away from a lot of mainstream things, I guess, and decided to set up our own business and practice with the intention that it would be a vehicle for being able to speak our own truths, if that doesn't sound too fancy, and hoping that, you know, it would pay our bills as well. So yeah, over the years, that's been a gradual process. And I mean, I think, you know, in terms of my professional background, I've worked in the mainstream, I've worked in mental health and public health, in counselling, and also in research and education. So it's been quite a span of different things, and consultancy, policy development. And so I'm interested in the whole kind of reach of things, how things work organizationally as well as individually. And in relation to diversity, I guess, being a person of color, I kind of, you can't, well, I feel like I can't ignore it. It's personal. But also, before we set up our Islamic counselling training, you know, and actually how Abdullah and I met, was really looking at diversity in different aspects, and wanting to incorporate that fully into our work, which was at the time was in the drugs field. And also then what we did was we set up, and it was actually the first, and I'm kind of proud of it, the first year-long course in, I don't know if we want to call it transcultural counselling, but we called it counselling in the context of racism. And it was specifically for Black and Asian students. And this was like way back, maybe in the early 90s, I would say, or maybe even earlier. Anyway, a long time ago. And that sort of, the sort of social justice ideas have really informed what, you know, what we're still interested in. And yeah. Great. So I don't know if that's the kind of background you meant, or
it's yeah, it gives something that we can explore further, and that's already your, you know, I'm getting that richness, and you know, the idea of culture, race, and psychology, and kind of coming forward on that. I know your work shifted into Islamic counseling, Islamic psychology, and therefore there's a sort of shift, I imagine, in terms of the people who you're more engaging with. That group is kind of evolved. The people you're directly engaging with, maybe in terms of clients, but also because you're teaching as well. So from that perspective, and I'd love for you to just share a bit about your experience with what you've described, and maybe anything else. And you know, so race and culture, and how, you know, something about how you're bringing that into, or how that is coming in to the work you're doing in Islamic counseling, and the people who you're engaging with through that work.
I mean, I suppose, you know, I like, one of the ways to respond might be to speak very personally, which is that as a young adult, I had become very disillusioned with mainstream society, and with the way that I was being made to feel invisible, and the sense that whatever I did and however hard I tried, I couldn't achieve what the world seemed to be promising me that I could achieve. And I'd internalized some of that. And so I started reading around that, and that reading gave me an awareness, but it was empowering. And I think that's very true of many activists. that actually that reading or that connection with people suddenly gives voice, you know, to experiences that have been personally difficult.
Mm.
And then I met up with a group of people, and, you know, we were all in discussion about these things. And, you know, we wanted to contribute. We were full of passion and energy, and we wanted to be, we wanted to make the world a better place. And we were, yeah, full of intensity, both anger and love, I would sort of say. And
Beautiful.
yeah, and that manifested in the work that we did, both in the mainstream, as well as with our own communities. And in terms of working in the mainstream, I would sort of say at that time I was incredibly angry, and I kind of saw it as my job to unpack, and I would say, in all honesty, to destroy white privilege. And I wanted to hurt people. I wanted to make people cry. I wanted to really push those truths home. And there was definitely a relationship between what was how I'd been disempowered personally and what I was teaching, and my sense of injustice and justice. And another thing that was going on, why we decided to set up that counselling in the context of racism, is because our experience, or my experience of counselling training, and Abdullah's had sort of different experiences in different ways, but one of my experiences of counselling training was that it was very devaluing of me on a very intimate level. It really got inside my head and heart, and I felt, you know, continually that I was being failed in terms of my psyche, and that was quite damaging. So we wanted to create a space in which people of colour could come together and, you know, be able to speak freely and explore freely issues around race without having to apologize or defend or be angry or all of those things. And what I think was really important was that in that space, people could be very explicit about issues around white privilege, but also it allowed us to just, and it felt like for the first time for many people, that we could just explore who we are and who we want to be and our vulnerabilities. And that felt incredibly precious, as well as the fact that we had students who would come on that course who would not have considered a mainstream course or would have easily dropped out. So that was incredibly, you know, important. And then in terms of the drugs field, you know, my speciality was working with young people, and Abdullah's was working with race. And, you know, one of the discussions we were having at that time, the majority of clients were white heroin users. And the discussion in the drugs field was that, you know, there aren't really women drug users, and there aren't drug users who are using other drugs, or if they are cocaine users, this is sort of, you know, very wealthy people. And we, you know, I'm being kind of like a bit brash about the way that I'm sort of saying what was the discussions that were happening in the drugs field, but it was kind of like, so we can ignore those people. The real difficult people and the real clients are these white heroin users, male heroin users that we're all seeing. And the services were set up in relation to them as well. And we felt that we intuitively felt, yes, there are Black and brown drug users, there are women drug users, there are users of drugs that don't fit into that established category. So we fought desperately to create spaces as well for those. And at the beginning, there weren't the numbers and there wasn't the understanding and there was a lot of criticism, blah, 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 blah. But we held out and we were supported by the organization we were in holding out, with a lot of challenges and fights and, you know, all of that. But I see it, I look back and I sort of see it as being very much a kind of a younger version of me, you know, exciting, thrilling, a lot of energy, working out like what's what, and, you know, and absolutely committed to changing the world.
Yeah.
Externally focused.
And I can really, as you're speaking, really palpably feel the persistence of this younger you there, you know, and you know, the sort of fire, you know, and you know, the just staying on the road, you know, on the path. Because when we want to do any sort of change in society that is attempting to remold, you know, the outer norms, even if it's in specific spaces, you know, even in a small group or something of people, you know, you know, the patience that we need and the vision and the setbacks that we have to face. Now, how we deal with that are all, kind of, you know, that's part of the terrain. And your background's really interesting in that, you know, you're working in terms of the changing the outer structures, with also you know, a rich awareness of the inner world, and I'm pretty sure your own inner processes. And I'd love for you to speak a bit about, you know, because we're also speaking here to people who are doing that. They're involved in outer change making, and there's an inner world that may not be spoken about of the activist or change maker, and so I'm not going to ask you for your top 3 tips, but feel free if you want to. But can you just speak to, you know, to this activist or change maker, and what you've learned in terms of particularly the inner experiences you faced when you're up against odds and their setbacks, and also staying true to values as well at the same time. So I'd love for you to address that.
I mean, this is such a profound kind of question. I mean, I guess one of the things that I'm very grateful for was the opportunity to be with like-minded, like-hearted people. And even though we fought like crazy, and, you know, there were people in our group who, you know, in our work group who were sort of, for example, promoting the medical model, which we were really angry about. And there were people who, you know, and we would fight about different hierarchies of oppression, you know, like, is it worse to be Black, or is it worse to be a woman, or, you know, on the whole intersectionality of it, without necessarily having the words for that. And we fought for all of those things with a passion, and we also muddled through. And I think those relationships were crucial, because we bonded through that fighting and argument, and we also understood how, you know, we were all so committed.
Yeah. And what sorry, carry on, but I want to throw in as well.
Yeah, go on.
What do you think, what do you feel in that experience? Was it, because it, you know, it can go along different pathways. It can be that you bond,